So
Okay.
and as you'll see, I don't know if I didn't send the slide deck to you. I think I sent it to Chris. It's focused more on why we're doing grants rather than specific funding sources. So I do throw quite a bit in there about that.
All righty. Well, I'll keep my video off until somebody asks me a
Sounds good.
question you want me to talk.
I'll let you know. Thanks, Dan.
All right.
We'll be starting up here in about, a little over a minute. Give people about 30 more seconds to log in, then we'll get started. Okay, looks like we're settling down there, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the New York State LTAP, the Cornell Upper Roads program. And welcome to another one of our foundational or Y webinars. Today's is on grant, state aid, federal aid, and other sources of revenue. We will be taking polls using the PollEV software, pollev.com/DavidOrrPE. If you open up your chat pod, that's closed for you to put stuff in, but that's where we send messages, links to the handout, things like that. So you don't have to type that in, you can just click on the link if you open up your chat pod. So again, I said I'm David Orr. We'll get started. This is again part of our summer series of webinars. We'll be doing these toward the end of August, and then we'll be taking a fall break while we're out with actual workshops out in the field, and then we'll be doing these again starting up in the fall once we get towards the winter season. So if you haven't been on one of these webinars before, just as a reminder, your audio settings and stuff you drag down to the bottom. The chat is closed, but again, I would open it because that's where we'll put our messages in. You're allowed to raise your hand. I may do that, ask you to raise your hand just to get a sense of questions, yes and no questions. And then you can put questions in the Q&A, and I really do want you to do so. Plus, we'll be using the PollEV as well. Okay. A caveat before we get started. This is not me going through a listing of all the kinds of federal aid that you could get, like from the new Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Some people call it the bill. Okay. This is really more of looking at an overview of outside revenue, why we do it, some of the caveats that come with those outside revenues, and what you should do next. Now, I would advise opening up the handout. It really does have a lot of good information in it. It's available on the web. Okay. In fact, I'll pull it down here on the screen temporarily. So you can see it's available. It's got a list of some good revenue sources. We'll talk about some of those during the course of the day. We'll even get some input from you. But we're going to focus really on the why, the foundation, the why we're doing these outside funding sources. To do that, we're going to be starting with budget responsibilities, talking a little bit about highway ownership and cost, responsibilities, talking a little bit about financing these sources of revenue. We'll go through all the different sources. And then at the end, depending on how much time we've got and whether they are able to join us, we're hoping to have Dan Keneally from New York State DOT can answer some questions about state aid, and Dan Wood and Chris Gatchell from Federal Highway answering questions about federal aid. We got Dan with us, so if nothing else, we'll have Dan for the last few minutes answering some of your questions that you might have. Now to get started, let's see if this thing here, I'm going to clear my data here if it'll let me. Give me a second here. The data didn't clear for some reason. I cleared it last night. Where'd my mouse go? There's my mouse. And I'm going to clear. Going to make you a restart. So restart, who do you work for? Okay, we got an honest person who works for the weekend, county, city, consulting firms. Okay, cool. Okay, state and federal. Okay. So here's who you work for. That's good. Most of you are working for counties. That's by far the largest. Okay, interesting. Okay. And then the next thing is, what is your role with your agency? Your job title? Are you an administrator, or a highway superintendent, or commissioner, an engineer, field crew, supervisor, board member, or none of the above? Again, this just helps me as I'm going through and answering some of your questions. Okay. If you put in none of the above, put it in the Q&A what your title is, if you don't mind. But this just helps me. We've got a nice blend here today, from administrative folks all the way to supervisors. So that's good to know. Okay, cool. And then where in the state are you from? So again, we'll let you click on the map. Again, I'm going to clear these data here. And let you re-click where you're from around the state. It said it cleared them all, but obviously it didn't. So we have to clear a few. Okay. A couple way up in the North Country, a bunch on the Hudson Valley, Syracuse. Okay. Okay. Cool. Good to see. The more the merrier, but we know the weather's good. You're out probably trying to get work done, things like that. I can't blame you there. So I want to start with talking about who owns roads here in New York State. Okay. So if you look at centerline mileage, and we'll come back to traffic in a little bit, but look at centerline mileage, over half the centerline mileage is maintained by towns. Didn't say own, but that's a right-of-way issue. We can talk about that some other day. But most of the roads are maintained by towns. Counties have quite a bit, almost 20%, 18%. The state actually only manages about 13% of the centerline mileage. Okay, and you'll see there's no federal highways. The federal, other than some federal land stuff, mostly national parks and veterans land, Department of Defense stuff, things like that. Feds don't maintain that many roads. It's maintained by states and local agencies. So the challenge, of course, is how do these local agencies maintain their roadways? Well, data we have from pre-COVID period, we sort of figured out statewide what is the average cost per mile. And yes, we're updating these data. I hope to have those for one of our fall webinars, or actually toward the end of the summer, the budget webinar coming up in August. But if you look at the cost pre-COVID, not so much what they need, but what they've got available. Towns spend about $14,000 per mile, okay, ranging from 10 to 20 for most agencies, okay. Counties, a little bit more, as you'd imagine, because they've got bridges, they've got a little bit higher level of service, they've got more traffic, so they're a little bit more per mile. Villages may not have as much traffic, but they've got usually some utilities, and urban areas tend to just cost a little bit more. So you can see there's a range, okay? And in cities outside New York, a little bit more than the villages. Again, similar reasons why towns are less than counties, more level of service. This is what we spend. Again, we probably need more. And the challenge, of course, is how do we pay for all of this? Well, if you look at just the towns, we'll look at the towns only because we've got good data for the towns, okay? You can see there's a range. As we said earlier, the cost per mile ranges from downstate near New York City. The towns down there may be spending as much as $100,000 per mile per year. But with the traffic volumes that they've got, it's actually not surprising. You get it in rural areas, it's a lot less. And if you look at from a standpoint of the town's total budget, well, in terms of total budget, most towns, the town highway department is the largest department. Okay, now this is just highway. And as you can see, all the ones that are green, yellow, and brighter, it's more than half is highway. And even the ones that are in the light blue and even some of the darker blues, if you add in infrastructure, water and sewer and all those other functions, usually the highway and infrastructure combined is the largest department in the town. So we're really trying to figure out how do we pay for all of that. Now, before we do that, let's talk a little bit about responsibilities. And this is our first poll outside the welcome one. So using one word, and you can put in multiple answers, by the way. What are you responsible for within your department? Okay, so using one word, again, you can put in more than one word. We're going to create a little word cloud here. What are you? Grant writing. Oh, you're responsible for grant writing. Okay. Planning. Okay. And of course, what is your department? Okay, so a lot of planning folks. Okay. See what else we got. Planning is dominating right now. Budget, soil, water, engineering. Okay. Certificates of deposit, I hope. Either that or those little discs that we used to put in computers. CDs. Projects. Okay. So these are things we do. Okay. These are responsibilities that we have. We're trying to plan. We're trying to figure out how we can move forward on things. But if you think about it, what does it really come down to? What does the public care about? Well, the public doesn't realize all these things are going on. What they care about is, do we have good signage? Do we take care of the snow and the ice in the winter? Do we have roads that are well maintained and properly set up for the traffic that's on them? Are our bridges safe? Okay, that's just the highway side. And most agencies over the years have added more and more things to their public works, their infrastructure. So just think about all the other things that we do around the state with local infrastructure. Recycling, parks, cemeteries, water, garbage collection. Quite a few agencies, villages especially, have electricity that they deal with. There's leaf pickup, there's maintaining the buildings and grounds for the town or for the county. So there's all these other duties that which we add on, sometimes separate budgets, sometimes not. Again, different webinar. But the point is, we got to maintain all of this. Okay. And again, we're focusing with town data. We've got other data for other agencies, but it's a good way to look at it. If you look at town data, this is from 2014, again, pre-COVID, and to look at local highway financing, almost 90%, 88% in 2014, of the money that was available for highway agencies at the town level came from local dollars. Now we'll talk about those sources of revenue in just a minute. Okay, about 10% came from state dollars, and a small little wedge came from federal and other sources. Now, if you run the same numbers for villages, very similar. If you run the same numbers for counties, the wedge is a little bit larger for state and quite a bit larger for federal, but still not a huge percentage. Okay, the local dollars still dominate. They're still over 80% for every level of government here in New York State. Okay, and who are we serving? What are we trying to do? Again, remember, we're looking for sources of funds. Who uses our roads and streets? Again, you can put in your answers. Who uses roads and streets? Okay, freight. You gotta have carry freight on the road. Okay, so that would include trucks and things like that. Yeah. What else? The residents. Yeah. Pedestrians. People getting to work. The workforce. School and buses. Emergency management. Okay. If you don't have that good road to get the fire truck to the site, you're in trouble. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Buses, residents. So residents is winning. People who live in your community. But remember, if you're commuting, you're probably not staying always in that particular community. Okay. I mean, well, my house is on the border, but I guess I sleep in the city of Ithaca and I work in the town of Ithaca. I'm entering two different municipalities. We're going to pay for things, right? So if we look back at those same maps with the town stuff, now let's look here. This is the cost per person by town. Okay, to maintain just the highway. This doesn't count the county roads or the village streets or the city streets or even the state highways. This is just the town portion. This is cost per person. So there are places in New York State where the cost per person is pretty high. Most of the state is pretty low. It's actually less than $1 a day. It's really a pretty good bargain. You know, good bang for the buck at the local level. You know, we've got towns that are spending less than $100 per person. What are the level of services where we want it? We don't know, but a lot of that has to do with higher populations, as you can see. You can actually see where the throughway is, the big cities, downstate. The cost per person is lower because they got enough people to spread the cost out. So really what it comes down to is how do we fund all of these responsibilities that we've got? Okay. So let's talk about the sources of revenue that are available. Well, obviously there's local revenue, and we're going to come back here in just a second to talk more about local revenue. We've got state aid of different types, both annual aid and grants. We've got federal aid. Okay. We've got the possibility of something called private-public partnerships. I'm not going to get into that too much today, but it is something you may want to think about. I don't see it being a real big issue on the local system, but maybe some city and county systems, you might be able to do a private-public partnership to help spread the dollars out. It's a balancing act between these things, but it's something that could be looked into. You could go out and you can get grants. We think mostly about grants that are governmental grants, but there are private grants. Some of them are the private-public partnerships. Some are just straight grants, or the non-governmental organizations that exist out there. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. Now, I do bring up the idea of borrowing funds. This isn't really creating revenue, but it allows you to stretch your dollars a little bit by taking out bonds and loans and leases, the value of money. Prior to this year, it was really more just a case of being able to spread out your cost and being able to buy large things with limited funds. But right now, with inflation being very high, this is actually something you might want to think about and look at and talk to your finance people, because the cost of inflation is actually also has the value of increasing the value if you've got a good bond, lease, or loan program. But again, we're not going to get into that too much today. So what I want to do is go through these sources of revenue. And again, my caveat is I'm not going through everything, but I really want you to think about what are the sources of revenue that you've got available. So let's start with, how do you get your own funds? How do you pay for that 80 to 90% of the highway system or transportation system that's maintained with local funds? Local revenue, not state. That CHIPS is a state revenue. Okay, we'll come back to CHIPS in a minute. Taxes, you could go get grants, okay, but local revenue, how does the local taxpayer pay? Yes, property taxes, that's by far the biggest. Property taxes is by far the biggest revenue source for local agencies here in New York State, okay? It's not 100%, there's one more I'm not seeing on there yet. There's actually quite a big number for some communities, especially, there it is, especially some villages and some towns, sales taxes, okay? So the biggest two by far are your property taxes and your sales taxes. Property taxes are paid for entirely pretty much by people who live or have businesses within that community. Sales taxes and other like hotel taxes, things like that, those could be by commuters and workers. It could be by tourists. But again, a lot of it's going to come from the people who live there. And while you have taxes in your community, you're going to be paying them when you're somebody else's community. So it really comes down to the population and how many people are coming in and out of your community as much as anything else. It's really hard to increase these things. We know that, okay? Yes, you can get a spike of sales tax when you get a lot of tourism in an area, and certainly as we came out of COVID, there was some big number jumps. But property taxes are capped. It can be overridden, but there's a limit to how much you can raise local revenue. So we're always going, well, if I can't raise local revenue, what can I do? Well, we could go look at state aid. So what sources are there for state aid right now? If you had to put it down, where would you go and have you gone in the past to get state aid? Okay. Where have you gone for state aid? CHIPS, Bridge New York. Yep. Okay. There's a pass-through process. DEC, there's a good one. Yep, I didn't have DEC listed, but I figured somebody might bring that up. There are some environmental funds available to pay for improvements in streams, dealing with pollutants. So don't assume the only funds are available are the ones through New York State local programs, which I'm going to talk about here in just a minute. NYSLTAP, which is part of the bridge process. Yep. Okay. NYSDOT, which is an energy grant that exists, can be very useful for upgrading your buildings. You can go talk to your NPOs. They don't have money themselves, they get it from others, but they're the ones you have to go to. We'll talk more about that if you really want to get some of the local aid that's available. Okay. So the point is there's a lot more out there. And by the way, notice there's other people who have been going out and getting grants. You may want to get to know and get to talk to them as well. Now, the most common ones, and this is the list that we got from local programs up at New York State DOT. It's one part of, not all of, one of the slides they had at our highway school a couple of weeks ago. These would be the ones that I would say, if you had to pick out the state DOT's local aid. Okay, these are annual programs. They're distributed mostly based upon formulas, like the CHIPS formula, which has to deal with center line mileage and traffic volumes and some other factors. The CHIPS is by far the largest. There's a Pave New York program, okay, that has some distributions to it. Bridge New York, which I didn't list, which is a semi-competitive program where there's a process. There's extreme winter recovery, which, pardon me, which is very similar to CHIPS and how it's distributed. There's a new state touring route program, which is actually pretty cool. The idea is if you're in a village and you're maintaining a road that says state highway, but it's actually a village street, little extra funds to help pay for that. But it turns out there's actually some of those funds available off the state tourism system. You need to read more details on that if you can later on. And then pave our potholes, that's a new one that came out with the last budget. The point is, there's always going to be some state aid out there. And a lot of it is annual, but again, some of it is competitive as well. So keep that in mind. Don't assume that you've exhausted all the possible state aids. Now, when it comes to federal aid, we can spend a ton of time just talking about federal aid. I mean, there's money through the state transportation plan, there's TAP and CMAQ, transportation alternatives and congestion mitigation. There's Tiger grants, Bridge New York, which is actually a federal program. Culvert New York is a state dollars. Bridge New York are actually federal dollars with some state matching, possibly NYSLTAP. It gets confusing at times, so be careful about that. There's this highway safety improvement program. Okay, so there's quite a bit of federal aid out there. Most federal aid either is part of an overall state transportation improvement program, the STIP you may have heard of, or it's competitive grants. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about the fact that those two things are a little bit different, but there's still requirements that exist with all of them, no matter what you do. Now, I don't want to forget to go any further. I want to just remind you there is this new Infrastructure Act out there. Again, a lot of people are calling it bill for the bipartisan infrastructure law. I just like the name because it fits with that old character from the cartoons in the 70s that I grew up with. I'm just a bill. There are a lot of new programs with bill. Some of them are coming out right now, like Safe Systems for All, SS4A. You may have seen, in fact, I actually throw that acronym on screen later on. There's a lot of these things that are coming out. They come out through a process known as a NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity. If you open up that handout, it's listed in there. You can actually go to the NOFO site, log in, create an account, and every morning you can actually get a list of any new NOFOs that come up or any new grant opportunities. There's also one for the state, by the way, that's also in the handout. You may want to go get that. Every single day you'll get a notification. I get those every single day. I also get the ones that list some other federal stuff. And sometimes you just shake your head, like, how do I keep it all straight? But that's what we need to sort of think about and do, especially for those of you who are doing grant writing and going out looking for other funds. The new bill does have some things in it with direct money coming to local agencies. Be wary of that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But remember, when it comes to local federal aid, most local federal aid, not all of it, but most local federal aid is a reimbursement program. What that means is that the local agency, the county, the village, the town, the city, has to upfront the funds and get reimbursed. Now, you don't have to get reimbursed for 100% of the project, but you have to be able to carry the finances to get to the next authorization, the next step in the process. And you can't move forward until you have that authorization. It's an authorization first process. You got to step by step by step. Okay. So most local federal aid, you need to go out there and you need to upfront the funds. So as you're going out and thinking about federal aid, do you have the financing for it? Do you have the staff for it? Okay. Now, I'm just curious. Okay, this is data that we had from before when we did a local federal aid class. Let me clear the data here. Come on, mouse. Wake up, mouse. There you go. And I'm going to clear the responses. There we go. How many federal aid projects have you completed? Oh, we got a bunch that done 10 or more. We got a bunch that done none. We got quite a range here. And nobody in the middle. Always interesting. Okay. Oh, we got a 5 to 9. We got a 1. Okay. So again, we got quite a range. We got a bunch of folks who've done none. We got a bunch of folks who've done a lot. I want you to just keep in mind, federal aid has a process. So does state aid as well. And there's a balancing act when you're going out and getting money and getting grants. Okay. Now we're doing a federal aid class on the web. We're doing again this fall. I'll give you the dates on that before we get done. But realize that about 80% of the federal aid projects at the local level here in New York State are done by about 20% of the agencies. That old 80-20 rule still fits even for federal aid. When you're thinking about getting federal aid, you got to realize there's some eligibility issues that exist, and those can make a big difference to how we move forward. So let me ask you this. And again, we'll see if this is what people voted for last time. I don't know why she's decided to not do that. But let me clear the responses and see what you think this time. What would be federally eligible? Bridge replacement on a local road, new sidewalks to school, rehab of a low volume road, safety improvements in an intersection, signal replacement at the mall. If you want to get federal aid. Yeah. What we're getting a sense of, I think you're starting to realize, not all projects are eligible for federal or even state aid. There are usually caveats and requirements for this. There's competitions that exist for these things. So yeah, bridge replacements, as we'll talk more in a little bit, always are available for federal aid, but there's competition usually. New sidewalks at school, because it's a safety improvement and there are specific programs like TAP, Transportation Alternative. Yep, that would be available. Rehab of a low volume road? Probably not. I mean, you just think about it competition wise, and we'll again talk about that a little bit more. Safety improvements in an intersection, absolutely. Signal replacement at the mall? Probably not. Unless again it's a safety issue, but again, maybe get the mall to pay for that. Maybe in fact you require the mall to pay for that, commercial people. And again, that's another way to stretch and move your dollars a little bit further by having others help pay for the cost. We don't call that a private-public partnership officially, but that's really what it is when you think about it. The private entity is helping pay the cost to spread out the dollars for you. Okay. Now, there are plenty of other sources of funds out there. One we actually use quite often. In fact, we've gotten grants from the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee probably 4 out of 5 years over the last decade and a half. Okay. COVID created some oddities, but we got grants. So we do these work zone package grants as an example. We paid for printing of our traffic sign handbook that you get from us. So we look for grants as well. So I'm not opposed to going out and looking for grants. In fact, I think they're a great thing, but we're going to talk here in just a minute about whether or not it's worth doing it or not. What other grants have you gotten? Not state aid, not federal aid, but what other grants have you gotten that we haven't talked about? That might be a small one, might be a private one, but what other grants have you gotten beyond the ones that I've already mentioned? A county grant. Some counties do have grants for local agencies. Yeah. Okay. Some park, for instance, systems are paid for that way. Okay. What other grants have people gotten? Hazard mitigation grants. Yep. A lot of those. DEC has some of those. There's some through EPA. Okay. Foundations have grants of different types. Okay. TAP-CMAC is a federal program. But again, competitive, something to think about, keep in mind. There's the Water Quality Improvement Program through the DEC and some of the other environmental folks. And NYSLTA has some grants as well that people have talked about. If you've got a water system or you've got water quality issues in even your natural water, something to think about. Ready? I've heard of it. I don't know that particular one. If you don't mind spelling that out, help everybody else out what READY stands for. That's always useful. We love our acronyms, don't we? But the point is, what I want you to really keep in mind is there's lots of grants out there. That's why, as I say, you might want to go into take the handout, go look at it. The very first item under the state and under the federal system are links to statewide or federal national programs, and you can actually log in, and then it will give you updates whenever these release grants are put out there. And so you don't have to go in searching for them. It can save you some time later on. Okay. So where does this all come? Resilient and economic development. Okay, initiative. I think CI part of the READY. I think you're right. Okay. And again, you're trying to improve your downtown core. You're trying to maybe improve parking in a particular area. Might be a way to go out and get some grants. There's quite a bit out there. But how do we decide who gets the grants? Let's go back and look at our functional system. This is a map of the city of Ithaca from something called the New York State DOT Functional Classification Viewer. Okay. And by the way, before I move on, there is someone who's put into the Q&A a link to the Resiliency and Economic Development Initiative, the READY program. And we'll answer that live, or type an answer actually. So everybody should be able to see it. Then once I hit this in the Q&A, so you can actually get a link to that. Again, for economic development, it can be very, very useful. But let's look at functional systems. Okay. Now, the map shows you by color from the Functional Classification Viewer from New York State DOT the level of roadways. So the red roadways are your principal and major arterials. Okay. And then you've got your blue roads, which are your collectors. Okay. These are the roads that are eligible for federal funds. They're the roads that tend to be more important in a network, your green, red, and blue. And those are the ones that tend to get most of the federal aid for good logical reason. Local roads, a lot of local roads, they're not going to be eligible for all federal and state aid, okay, depending on the process. And of course, you may even have very, very low volume roads that are less than 400 vehicles a day. They're really important to your local agency, but they probably are not going to be eligible for federal aid, or even if they are, think about the competition. If it's a competition between a road with 400 vehicles a day versus 40,000, it's probably going to go to the 40,000. Because if you take that same functional classification, if you look at the center line mileage, we talked about that earlier, towns maintain over half the local road system. And if you add the county and village local roads, it's 65 to 80% of the mileage in New York State would be considered local roads. But if you look at the traffic volume, okay, depending where you are in the country, these are national data, Principal arterials, the interstate, the main roads that go from city to city, 40 to 60%, depending where you are in the country and where you are even within the state, even if it's only 5 to 10% of the mileage. So you can imagine if you're the federal government, you really want to focus your money where there's the most traffic volume, where the most important roadways are, and it makes perfect sense. Okay? And so you're going to put your money into those major systems. There's going to be some money available for collector roads, okay? But the local road system is going to have a hard time competing just because of traffic volume. Now, I do want to give you two major exceptions, okay? So I always want you to keep this in mind when you're looking at transportation. Bridges and safety, okay? Bridges and safety are always eligible, okay? Unless it's specifically called out that they're not. So if you've got a low volume bridge, that's important. I know this is a pedestrian bridge, but it's a pretty picture that I took. But if it's a bridge that serves public traffic, it's going to be eligible for federal funds. Now, it's going to have to compete, but it's always eligible because it may be really critical for that particular community. And if it's a safety improvement, especially if you can combine that with other projects, safety dollars, you can probably go get some safety dollars. And we'll talk about how you do that here in just a couple of minutes, okay? So keep that in mind. You may not be eligible for everything, but always keep in mind bridges and safety always come up into play. Now, when you go get federal dollars or state dollars, there's a process. And again, we could spend tons of time, but again, I'm focusing on the foundational stuff. This is sort of the wheel of steps for federal aid developed by the New York State Department of Transportation. And as you can see, you got to plan the project, you got to fund it, you got to scope everything out, design it, and then you construct it. It's a big process because we're trying to make sure we use those dollars efficiently, effectively, and in compliance with all the other rules and regulations that exist. So there's a process involved, and you've got to be able to do that process to go get those funds. There's nothing worse than going out and getting federal aid or state aid and not being able to complete the process. You don't want to have to turn the money back in. And by the way, neither does the federal government or the state government. That's absolutely something they don't want to do. Okay. So what do we do next? What do we do next? Well, just keep in mind if you're looking at aid for other revenue sources, where is it coming from and what do you have to do to use it? So some aid is annual. Most state aid, CHIPS, emergency winter recovery, this is going to be annual aid, and you just have to follow through the process for CHIPS and emergency winter recovery. And it's actually not an onerous process at all. There's some steps, yes, but again, just guaranteeing of funding. Okay. There are some things we could all want to improve, but overall, pretty good system. Okay. Some are going to be part of the overall state transportation improvement program. Okay. So for instance, if you're going out and you're getting a lot of the state aid that's actually federal aid hidden behind it, it's got to be put onto the step. So Bridge New York, actually, even though it's a semi-competitive program, really actually has to get put into the state transportation improvement program. Safe Routes for School, which is really the transportation alternatives program, that's got to be part of the STIP. Okay. So there's a process that's involved. So you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to work with your metropolitan planning organization, with your state, with somebody to get it on the state plan. Okay. And then finally, there are some that are directly competitive funds. Okay. They may get shoved into the STIP, but they're primarily competitive. A new one that came out of bill very recently, and there's a link to it in your handout, something called Safe Systems for All. And it's just one of many that are starting to come out. Okay, either through DOT, US DOT, or through the Federal Highway Administration. So just keep that in mind. If it's annual, you can budget for it and plan on it. How much is available, obviously, is a decision that's made by the legislature, but it's something that you can put into your annual plan. Others might be longer term transportation plan, and then others you might go and compete. So the question is, what do we do next? Well, I always ask them questions whenever I'm going to think about grants, including ourselves here at the LTAP Center. First, is the grant process worth the revenue? Well, you hear this question a lot. It's actually an important question. A lot of people go, oh man, the federal process. Oh, that's a tough process. Yeah, actually it is. I'm not going to argue that it isn't. It's there for a reason. Okay. And it's there for larger projects. It really may not be justifiable for a really small project, but if you have a need, go think about it. Okay. But just make sure you know the whole process before you apply. Is it worth it? You might be surprised the answer is yes in some cases, and other times you might be surprised the answer is no. You may just be better off using local dollars. The other question I always ask is, can you maintain it? A lot of our processes that we do, especially the federal processes, are really for capital improvements, long-term improvements. Can you maintain it? You know, if you build a bridge, but you build it on the cheap and has a lot of maintenance costs, is that really a good use of grant money? As you go through the scoping process, maybe you design it for less maintenance so you can maintain it with your local dollars. Can you maintain it with local dollars? If you can't, think long and hard before you go get that, because you really don't want a situation where you spend all the money for something and you can't maintain it. Okay. And then, of course, where do I get help? Okay. Where do I go? Well, we're going to talk about where you go for help in just a second. But just think about this. Remember, when you're going and getting a grant, it's like taking out a loan. There's an obligation. Yes, the money is coming from the federal government or the state government or even a private-public partnership, but somebody is paying for that. It's not free money. So it's like taking out a loan, an obligation out there. So privately, with your own money at your own house, which of these would you pay for with a loan? I'm not talking about putting on the credit card to pay off the end of the month. I'm talking about which one would you pay for with a loan? Okay. So let's see what people think. Okay. And almost everybody is putting down, yep, I'm going to do a new bathroom. A new bathroom, clearly we're going to put one. By the way, you're supposed to be able to put in more than one choice. I don't know if it did that or not. But most of us would not think about utility bills being something we borrow for, or work boots, or even dinners. And yet you hear about people who've done that. They've built up credit. They're not paying off their credit card. Do we want to take that obligation? So which item here would you need to finance in one way or another? Dump truck, chip seals, rail trail conversion, tools for the shop, a brand new salt barn. Okay. If the answer is you would need to finance it, you may think about some of those borrowing techniques that we talked about to finance it, to spread the cost out, like say for dump trucks. Because if you got 10 dump trucks, you're replacing one every single year, that might not be a grant opportunity, but you certainly think about financing. If you're thinking about financing it, that's also something to think about. Maybe that's a good item to go out and get a grant. Maybe that's something where we want to think about and going out and getting some other sources of revenue to spread that cost out, to have those larger pools of money from the state and federal government available to help spread those costs out, sort of like insurance. Okay. Now, the other thing you want to keep in mind, though, is how long does it take you to make a project go from start to finish? Now, again, I'm going to clear the data because the computer decided not to do it last night. How long does it take you to take a project from inception to construction? Okay. More than 5, 1 to 2, 3 to 4. Okay. Just realize if you're going out and getting dollars from others, especially federal aid or even sometimes state aid, it may take longer because of these processes to protect, make sure the money is well spent. You might want to think about it's going to take longer. If you need to implement something fast, you may want to think long and hard about whether you want to use local dollars or not. Now, we joke a little bit about the fact that it's like a snail's pace for federal aid. It isn't so much the snail's pace, it's that it's got to be very methodical. There's a process, there's steps involved. And so you have to realize that as part of your planning, part of your going out and getting federal aid. Is it worth the time? Is it worth the effort? Okay. So if you can answer these questions, you've got an idea. You can move forward now. Okay, so let me give you some ideas. Some things that will help you as you go out and you get federal aid, or you even use the aid that's already there, like CHIPS. Okay. First thing, foremost, the number one thing I would tell anybody who's thinking about going out and getting a grant, have a plan. Okay. A highway safety plan, a local road safety plan, a tribal safety plan. Have yourself a plan. Safety is where we talk about most of the time, but a bridge project plan, some kind of plan is really, really critical. Okay. You don't want to wait until your stop sign looks like this to start thinking about it's time to replace it. You need to have a plan in place. That plan is really critical. And by the way, this sign actually at night was still working, surprisingly. But having a plan, it does three things for it. Number one is it helps you get grants. If you've got a plan, the plan will help you get other grants because people are going to go, hey, I got two projects, they're pretty equal. Person who has a plan, that's the one we're going to go with because I know they can probably implement it. Okay. It also makes sure you can implement it, that you can use those federal dollars in such a way to get your money's worth. Okay. So having a plan is really valuable. And truth be told, having a plan is a great communication tool with the public. The public gets an input into the plan, and more importantly, they can see you've got a plan in place to move forward. So the communication tool is fantastic. So have a plan before you go out and get the grant. Okay. We're trying to do things here. We're always writing plans. Okay. Now in the Q&A, there's a said, are there any grants available for planning? There are some ways you can pay for some grants for planning. I would check with your metropolitan planning organization. In fact, that's my next little bullet point is go get help. Go talk to your state representatives, your CHIPS representatives as a minimum. If you're in a metropolitan planning organization, an MPO, you definitely want to get to know them really, really well. They can help you with all these things. They may even be able to do some of these planning processes. That's their middle name, Metropolitan Planning Organization. If you're outside of a metropolitan planning organization, you may want to talk to your regional planning and development board. Okay. There's ones in the southern tier, 3 of them. There's some of the Catskills. There's the Tug Hill Commission, which is its own unique animal up in the Adirondacks. You want to get to know those people. They can help you with some of the planning process. And there are some specific dollars for planning purposes. And then, of course, if you're not sure, there are some federal folks that can help you out. Like all of us, all of these folks have one limitation, time. So you got to give them time to work out with them. Okay. So, and again, ask yourself 3 questions before you go out and get your grant with your plan. First off, do you have the finances, especially if you're going for a plan that's like a federal one where it's reimbursement? Do you have the finances to carry that to get the process? Do you have the staff? If you're getting federal aid, you have to have a full-time staff person managing the project. Do you have someone who can do that? Okay. Do you have enough staff? And then I always go back, can I maintain it? When I'm done, can I maintain the system? Okay. Now, we've got a note here. Someone, for instance, as an example, NYSLTAP has some energy conservation planning funds. Local waterfront revitalization planning funds available from the Department of State. There are plenty of sources out there. Okay. What I really want you to think about is it worth going and getting it as much as anything else. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, just so you know, what we were planning on doing is hoping to have folks from DOT and from Federal Highway. We got one person from Federal Highway here, Dan Wood, who can answer any questions he can answer dealing with aid. So the Q&A is available. You can ask Dan or I any questions you want. If we can't get you an answer, we'll save these and we'll try to forward them on to the right people and get an answer back to you. So again, open it up to questions. And Dan, do you have any thoughts about federal aid that you think folks should know about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities there for you to take advantage of. And I know I keep hearing people say that it is a difficult process. I mean, there, you know, as Dave has been explaining, it is a methodical process, but it isn't something that is so difficult you shouldn't take advantage of the opportunities that are available. I guess one thing that if you're not aware of with the new bill that just came out that David mentioned is that there are a lot more opportunities available than what in past years. And right now, we are trying to make more funds available at the local level. If you compare last transportation bill to this transportation bill, that is the one big change that you will see, is that we are trying to push funding down to the local level more so than we have in past years. And you'll see that in several of the discretionary grant programs that are new to the program. Some of those, the state DOT isn't even eligible to apply for them. It's just locals that can apply to them. So that kind of shows you that, you know, our desire to get funding down to the local level the best that we can.
And some of those funds are going to go directly to the local agencies, right, Dan?
Yes, that's where it becomes the direct recipient or subrecipient status. But you need to be cautious of that. States can be direct recipients and take the state out of the process if they want to do that. But what you need to be aware of is that without state help, you are responsible for all the deliveries and making sure that your project progresses appropriately and within that timeline that Dave laid out earlier. One thing I will say though is, I mean, state DOT is very helpful in going through that process. They know the process. They got the local programs manual there, which again lays out the process and how to administer and deliver a federal aid project with the state's help. And they can be a huge benefit. But if you still choose to do it on your own, you do have that option.
But
now,
again,
one thing, Dave, that I would mention as far as a couple of the a state program that you did not mention is that there is a culvert replacement program out there that the state is doing.
Culvert New York, yep.
Yep, so that is available for you as well. And then another one, which is related to the Transportation Alternatives Program, is Recreational Trails Program, which is another federally funded program. That's another one that is available to you as well. Because I know that connecting communities is very important. I know that that is a big push for federal highways from a safety perspective, as well as for quality of life improvements and environment improvements. So Rec Trails plays a very important role in that program as well.
Yep. But again, there's a perfect example, actually. I know of a town that got one of those grants.
Yep.
They couldn't complete the process. They didn't really have enough staff to complete it. And the county came in and saved their tail, helped them out. But have a plan. That's why I always say, have a plan and ask yourself if you can maintain it. If the answer is yes on both, yeah, go for it. There's plenty of sources out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Got a note here, Dan. SS4A has an option for creating a safety action plan, and the Bridge Investment Program has dollars for planning. You agree?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again, please?
So the first one is the new Safe Systems for All has an option for creating a safety action plan.
Correct.
And then Bridge Investment Program has dollars for planning.
Yes.
Okay. So there's alternatives if you need to even get the planning process started. But even before you do that, I would still say, put a plan together. It doesn't have to be complicated, but trust me, having one makes a big difference when you apply.
Yep. Now, one thing I guess to get to, because I know that there was a question that that Dave raised about funds for doing planning. Within these NOFOs, when they come out, they will have in there what activities are eligible for the funding. And several of them will specifically say that planning is a function that is eligible for those funds. So when those notice of funding opportunities do come available, read what is eligible, and that'll basically tell you what you can use the funding for.
Yep, but remember, most federal dollars, you have to have authorizations first.
Correct.
In the fund, so be very careful about that.
Yes.
What is the best resource to find out more about these grants? Well, if you open up that handout, purposely put in there in the handout 2 sources for you. Let me pull that back up. One of them in the sources was the New York State Grant Opportunities website. It's a website you can go on. You can actually log in, create an account, and you'll get a notice every single day. And it will give you new items, and you can also do a lot of searching what's available at the state side. And at the federal side, there's the www.grants.gov, which is where they put the notice of funding opportunities, or NOFOs, as you'll hear the term used. And again, you can log in for that too, create an account, and every day you'll get a notification when these new things come out. So those would be the two places I would start. If you're in an MPO, go talk to your MPO, set up a meeting. Definitely worth talking to that. And if you're not, talk to your regional planning development board, your folks from the state, or Tug Hill if you're in the Tug Hill Commission. Anybody else you would add to the list?
No, I guess that's pretty good. And then also I will mention is the grants.gov site. That is also where you would actually apply for that particular grant as well. The process and how to apply for the funds is included at that website as well.
Yep.
And I will mention that there are, within USDOT, there are hundreds of grants that are available. Just federal highways, we have 44 grant programs that you can actually apply for. So there are a lot there.
Somebody said they joined late to the handout. If you open up your chat pod, it'll fill up there. We put in there, because I know if you come in late, you don't see the earlier chats. We'll throw in the chat pod what the answer is. With that, Dan, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, not a problem. For those who are interested, we do have an online local federal aid workshop where we're going to go through the federal aid process. At the moment, it's focused on the ones that are state, where the state is the pass-through that goes through the state. Then we'll give some updates on any of the other federal processes that we can between now and then. And that's on September 13th online. So you can, just like this, sit at your home and have on your bunny slippers and your scrubs and be comfortable. Okay. And we do have our continuing summer webinar series. Taking a couple of weeks off with the holidays coming up. So our next one is emergencies. It's going to be a panel, and then we're going to have some others. The ones with the stars beside them should be worth professional development hours in engineering for those who care and need them. Okay. And with that, unless somebody has more questions, and again, you're welcome to ask them. We can stay online there and ask as many as you want. But all this information and links and stuff is up on our website. This webinar will be recorded and put up on our website as well. And you can always send a question to myself directly or the overall program at either david.org or clrp@cornell.edu. Okay. And let me. One more thing. See if this works here. I put in the chat the link for the handout for those who are looking for it. So open up the chat. Does the professional development credit count towards AICP? At the moment, it does not. I don't have the information on that, to be honest. We focused on the engineering side, but if you send me something, Samantha, I can look at it and see. I don't know what the process is. Be glad to help you out. I just don't know the process for that particular thing because I'm an engineer first. Okay. So Dan, have yourself a great week. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
And we'll let everybody go. We'll give you back 2.5 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Have yourself a great day. Bye-bye.